Hi everyone, here we are with chapter 8 of the Ickabog, the Day of Petition. Selfish, vain and cruel. Selfish, vain and cruel. The words echoed in the king's head as he pulled on his silk nightcap. It couldn't be true, could it? It took Fred a long time to fall asleep, and when he woke in the morning he felt, if anything, worse. He decided he wanted to do something kind, and the first thing that occurred to him was to reward Beamish's son, who defended him against that nasty little girl. So he took a small medallion that usually hung around the neck of his favourite hunting dog, asked a maid to thread ribbon through it, and summoned the Beamishes to the palace. Bert, whom his mother had pulled out of class and hurriedly dressed in a blue velvet suit, was struck speechless at the presence of the king, which Fred enjoyed, and he spent several minutes speaking kindly to the boy, while Major and Mrs. Beamish nearly burst with pride in their son. Finally, Bert returned to school with his little gold medal around his neck, and was made much of in the playground that afternoon by Roderick Roach, who was usually his biggest bully. Daisy said nothing at all, and when Bert caught her eye, he felt hot and uncomfortable, and shoved the medallion out of sight beneath his shirt. The king, meanwhile, still wasn't entirely happy. An uneasy feeling stayed with him like indigestion, and again he found it hard to sleep that night. When he woke the next day, he remembered that it was the day of the petition. The Day of Petition was a special day held once a year, when the subjects of Cornucopia were permitted an audience with the king. Naturally, these people were carefully screened by Fred's advisers before they were allowed to see him. Fred never dealt with big problems. He saw people whose troubles could be solved with a few gold coins and a few kind words. A farmer with a broken plough, for instance, or an old lady whose cat had died. Fred had been looking forward to the Day of Petition. It was a chance to dress up in his fanciest clothes, and he found it so touching to see how much he meant to the ordinary people of Cornucopia. Fred's dressers were waiting for him after breakfast, with a new outfit he'd requested just the previous month. White satin pantaloons and matching doublet with gold and pearl buttons, a cloak edged with ermine and linen in scarlet, and white satin shoes with gold and pearl buckles. His valet was waiting with the golden tongs, ready to curl his moustaches, and a page boy stood ready with a number of jewelled rings on a velvet cushion, waiting for Fred to make his selection. "Take all that away, I don't want it," said King Fred crossly, waving at the outfit the dressers were holding up for his approval. The dressers froze. They weren't sure they'd heard correctly. King Fred had taken an immense interest in the progress of the costume, and had requested the addition of the scarlet lining and fancy buckles himself. "I said take it away," he snapped, when nobody moved. "Fetch me something plain. Fetch me that suit I wore to my father's funeral." "Is your Majesty quite well?" inquired his valet, as the astonished dressers bowed and hurried away with the white suit and returned with double quick time with the black one. "Of course I'm well," snapped Fred, "but I'm a man, not a frivoling popinjay." He shrugged on the black suit, which was the plainest he owned, though still rather splendid, having silver edging to the cuffs and collar, and onyx and diamond buttons. Then, to the astonishment of the valet, he permitted the man to curl only the very ends of his moustaches, before dismissing both him and the page boy, bearing the cushions full of rings. "There," thought Fred, examining himself in the mirror. "How can I be called vain? Black definitely isn't one of my best colours." So unusually speedy had Fred been in getting dressed that Lord Spittleworth, who was making one of Fred's servants dig earwax out of his ears, and Lord Falpoon, who was guzzling a plate of Duke's Delights, which he ordered from the kitchen, were caught by surprise, and came running out of their bedrooms, pulling on their waistcoats and hopping as they put on their boots. "Hurry up, you lazy chaps," called King Fred as the two lords chased him down the corridor. "There are people waiting for my help." And would a selfish king hurry to meet simple people who wanted favours from him, thought Fred. No, he wouldn't. Fred's advisers were shocked to see him on time and plainly dressed for Fred. Indeed, Herringbone, the chief adviser, wore an approving smile as he bowed. "Your Majesty is early," he said. "The people will be delighted. They've been queuing since dawn." "Show them in, Herringbone," said the king, settling himself on his throne and gesturing to Spittleworth and Falpoon to take the seats on either side of him. The doors were opened, and one by one the petitioners entered. Fred's subjects often became tongue-tied when they found themselves face to face with a real live king whose picture hung in their town halls. Some began just turn the brightness off, it's a bit dark on that. Some began to giggle or forgot what they'd come for, and once or twice people fainted. Fred was particularly gracious today, and each petition ended with the king handing out a couple of gold coins, or blessing a baby, or allowing an old woman to kiss his hand. Today, though, while he smiled and handed out gold coins and promises, the words of Daisy Dovetail kept echoing in his head, selfish, vain, and cruel. He wanted to do something special to prove what a wonderful man he was, to show that he really was ready to sacrifice himself for others. Every king of Cornucopia had handed out gold coins and trifling favours on the day of petition. Fred wanted to do something so splendid that it would ring down the ages, and you didn't get into the history books by replacing a fruit farmer's favourite hat. The two lords on either side of Fred were becoming bored. They'd much rather have been left to loll in their bedrooms till lunchtime than sit here listening to peasants talking about their petty troubles. After several hours, the last petitioner passed gratefully out of the throne room, and Flapoon, whose stomach had been rumbling for nearly an hour, heaved himself out of his chair with a sigh of relief. "Lunchtime!" boomed Flapoon. But just as the guards were attempting to close the doors, a kerfuffle was heard, and the doors flew open once more. Chapter 9. The Shepherd's Story. "Your Majesty," said Herringbone, hurrying towards King Fred, who'd just risen from the throne. "There is a shepherd from the marshlands here to petition you, sire. He's a little late. I could send him away if your Majesty wants his lunch." "A marshlander," said Spittleworth, waving his scented handkerchief beneath his nose. "Imagine, sire." "Dashed impertinence being late for the king," said Flapoon. "No," said Fred after a brief hesitation. "No, if the poor fellow has travelled this far, we shall see him. Send him in, Herringbone." The chief adviser was delighted at this further evidence of a new, kind and considerate king, and hurried off to the double doors to tell the guards to let the shepherds inside. The king settled himself back on the throne, and Spittleworth and Flapoon sat down on their chairs, their expressions sour. The old man, who now tottered up and the long red carpet towards his throne, was very weather-beaten and rather dirty, with his straggly beard and ragged patched clothes. He snatched off his cap as he approached the king, looking thoroughly frightened, and when he reached for the place where people usually bowed or curtsies, he fell to his knees and said, "Your Majesty," he weaved. "Your Majesty," Spittleworth imitated him softly, making the old shepherd sound like a sheep. Flapoon's chins trembled with silent laughter. "Your Majesty," continued the shepherd, "I have travelled for 5 long days to see ye. It has been a hard journey. I has ridden in hayricks when I could and walked when I couldn't, and my boots is all holes." "Oh, do get on with it, do," muttered Spittleworth, his long nose still buried in his handkerchief. "But all the time I was travelling I thought of old Patch, sire, and how ye'd help me if I could but reach the palace." "What is old Patch, good fellow?" asked the king, his eyes upon the shepherd's much darned trousers. "'Tis my old dog, sire, or was, I should perhaps say," replied the shepherd, his eyes filling with tears. "Ah," said Fred, fumbling with the money purse at his belt. "Then, good shepherd, take these few gold coins and buy yourself a new—" "Nay, sire, thank ye, but it bain't a question of the gold," said the shepherd. "I can find myself a puppy easy enough, though it'll never match old Patch." The shepherd wiped his nose on his sleeve. Spittleworth shuddered. "Well, then, why have you come to me?" asked King Fred, as kindly as he knew how. "To tell you, sire, how old Patch met his end." "Ah," said the King Fred, his eyes wandering to the golden clock on the mantelpiece. "Well, we'd love to hear the story, but we're rather wanting our lunch." "'Twas the Ickabog that ate him, sire," said the shepherd. There was an astonished silence, and then Spittleworth and Flapoon burst out laughing. The shepherd's eyes overflowed with tears, which fell sparkling onto the red carpet. "Ah, they've laughed me from Jeroboam to Shoeville, sir, and when I've told them why I was coming to see you, laughed themselves silly they have and told me I was daft in the head, but I seen the monster with my own 2 eyes, and so did poor Patch, afore he was 8. King Fred felt a strong urge to laugh along with the 2 lords. He wanted his lunch, and he wanted to get rid of the old shepherd, but at the same time that horrid little voice was whispering selfish, vain, and cruel inside his head. "Why don't you tell me what happened?" King Fred said to the shepherd, and Spittleworth and Flapoon stopped laughing at once. "Well, sire," said the shepherd, wiping his nose on his sleeve again, "'twas twilight and right foggy, and Patch and me was walking home round the edge of the marsh. Patch sees a marsh teasel." "Sees a what?" asked King Fred. "A marsh teasel, sire, them's bald, rat-like things that live in the marsh. Not bad in pies, if you don't mind the tails." Flapoon looked queasy. "So Patch sees the marsh teasel," the shepherd continued, "and he gives chase. I shouts for Patch and shouts, sire, but he was too busy to come back, and then, sire, I hears a yelp Patch, I cries. Patch, what's got you, lad? But Patch don't come back, sir. And then I sees it through the fog, said the shepherd in a low voice. Huge it was, with eyes like lanterns and a mouth as wide as that there throne, and its wicked teeth shining at me. And I forgets old Patch, sir, and I runs and runs and runs all the way home. And next day, sir, I sets off, sir, to come and see ye. The Ickabog ain't my dog, sir, and I want sick punished. The king looked down at the shepherd for a few seconds, then very slowly got to his feet. Shepherd, said the king, we shall travel north this very day to investigate the matter of the Ickabog once and for all. If any trace of the creature can be found, you may rest assured that it shall be tracked to its lair and punished for its impudence in taking your dog. Now take these good few gold coins and hire yourself a ride back home in a hay cart. My lords, said the king, turning round to the stunned Spittleworth and Flapoon. Play, change into your riding gear and follow me to the stables. There is a new hunt afoot. Okay, so we finished that chapter. And what I want you to do is I'm going to put an ape question up on Purple Mash. And I want you to think through there, how has what Daisy Dovetail said about the king turned him into a better king? So you need to think, what was he like before? How is he like now? What's changed? And has it affected him? Has it made him into a better king for him to be aware what Daisy Dovetail thinks of him? So have a go. I'll set it up on Tmash for you with different steps and things, and see how you get on, because I'd love to know whether you think he's become a better king for hearing that somebody thinks he's selfish, vain and cruel, and how you know he's become a better king. So I'll make sure that I put in that you need to put quotes, because you must use quotes. And we'll see you tomorrow to see how the journey to the Ickabog's lair goes.